Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. I just can't get over it. I've been retired for a while, but man, I love doing shows on Friday. There's just something about Friday that still agrees with me. TGIF, everybody. We're going to be talking about the big three on the PBG today, but not in the way that you may be thinking. We're going to be talking Iowa specifically, some history, RAGBRAI, the Register's annual Great Bike Ride across Iowa. Well, it started in 1973, and that's a big year with me. That's a red letter year, folks, because that's the year that I graduated from high school. We're going to be talking about some journalism heroes of mine, and we're going to be talking to Jim Walters. I'm going to introduce Jim here in just a minute, but to kind of lay the groundwork for what I'm talking about today. And again, it's going to be about the big three with a focus on climate. All of these things are interrelated, folks, always climate, war, and healthcare. And here is Jim's graphic. Hopefully that you saw this on YouTube. RAGBRAI in Iowa. It ain't what they used to be. You don't hear much about you don't get the real story. People don't put that out there because it's not happy, clappy, promotable stuff that the governor and the media and the big business wants out there. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. And by the way, I hope that you saw this. I put this on my Facebook page. It shows you the gravity of what we're talking about. We're going to have some fun today, but this is serious stuff, folks. This was in The Guardian. And this, let me get this a little bit bigger now so that I can read it for you, because this is really important. It is from the great James Hansen, some comments that he made. It's an article that's in The Guardian. You can get that online. Check it out. I mean, he's saying it flat out. We are damned fools. The scientist who sounded the climate alarm in the 80s warns of worse to come. And there's the graphic for it. James Hansen, who testified to Congress on global heating back in 1988, says the world is approaching a new climate frontier. And it ain't the kind of frontier that you want to be a part of, that you want to see. But anyway, that's in The Guardian. And I had put that on my Facebook page, and I just wanted people to, have a look at that to lay the groundwork a little bit. Okay, so let's introduce our guest here. Let's bring his graphic up on screen. It is Jim Walters. He's been working with trees and flowers most of his life. God, you got to love that. He farmed for 25 years. Now, he was farming back in the day when I was farming, when the farming modus operandi in Iowa was one hell of a lot different than it is today. We're going to talk about that. He then worked as a groundskeeper at the University of Iowa for 20 years before retiring. He grew up in western Johnson County near what is now the Redbird Farms wildlife area. He's a new friend of Podcast by George, and he joins us now on the live line from his home turf. And this fella, I'm telling you, he knows turf, folks. Let me take that off the screen. Let me click this button. Let me click this one and say good morning to our good pal, Jim Walters. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, George.
Say, I mentioned that. I didn't tell you that I was going to ask you, but the Redbird Farms wildlife area. Now, that sounds great. I mean, is it still great, or is something happening there as well?
No, it's a very wonderful place. I actually grew up in it. My first family home, where we had our first acreage there on the Old Mans Creek, was actually now in Redbird Farm wildlife area that was donated by Tina Bergelli to the state. And my first school was right there across the road in the Redbird Farm wildlife area. I went to a one-room country school, and that's basically the very area I grew up in. My parents then bought a larger farm about a half mile to the south and became quite larger farmers.
Well, Jim's a great and a prolific writer. He pops up every now and then in the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and then it gets repurposed, put in the Des Moines Register, where I see his writings, and then goes out on the USA Today. So he gets around that way because of his great writings. And I don't know, I had Chris Gleninger on, the KCCI meteorologist that had his life threatened and had to go back home here just recently. And he talked about this drought flood cycle. Now, where I'm at, Jim, we're in drought, and we've been in really pretty severe drought for many years. It's very isolated around us, not so much north of us, say up in Ames. I don't think they're in drought at all. But what about the Redbird Farms wildlife area? Is it in drought or flood, or is it fairly normal?
Well, it's dry. We're the Iowa City area is we've had some timely rains lately that have just kind of brought things along. A week or two ago, before these last rains, I thought we were going to lose quite a bit of corn and beans out there, but the last few rains have just brought them along.
Yeah.
And my garden as well. I'm picking sweet corn now, along with the raccoons.
Well, Jim's an old farmer. You can tell they always speak. They kind of keep a calendar and kind of know where they're at based on the corn and soybeans. Well, let me get this up on screen here because I want to get into this because Jim wrote a great little column. Not a lot to it, but man, it said a lot. It wasn't very long, but it said a lot when it comes to the state of Iowa and RAGBRAI. And to background a little bit for our viewers, and we have the viewers from around the world, really, but around the country that may not be familiar with it. This is an old article, a clip that I had from the Des Moines Register, Bike Ride Across Iowa, written by John Karras. He said, Donald Call and I are going to ride from Sioux City to Davenport the week of August 26th, and we'd like to have as many of you as are able to join us along the way. The purpose of the trip, sponsored by our boss, the Des Moines Register and Tribune, is to promote cycling on Iowa's great cycling asset, paved secondary roads. Of course, it's still cycling, but it's more of a rolling carnival. Everybody will tell you that today. It's changed quite a bit. Now, this was written back in 1973. Donald Call and John Karras, rest in peace. But tell us about kind of the change from being a cycling event and celebrating secondary roads, Jim, and what it's become today, which is kind of a for-profit rolling carnival.
Yeah, the first RAGBRAI was very small by comparison to what's going on today. Yeah, I think they're expecting 25,000 riders.
Wow.
Next week. So it is a big event. And I have not ridden on a subsequent RAGBRAI. I rode on the first one, but I have not ridden on any other RAGBRAIs. I did, as I mentioned in my column, give some thought to going on this one, and then thought better of it.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. Let me see here if there's anything else in this article that I wanted to show before we talk about your writings. This was also part of it's kind of fuzzy. You're welcome to join us for a morning, a day, or the entire trip. Now, that's still true. Anyone who rides with us will receive a certificate. It was a big deal back in 1973. I got a certificate.
We actually ended up getting a patch.
Oh, okay. Well, that's even better, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone completing the entire ride, please figure on making your own overnight accommodations will receive special recognition. So, was there an official tally of the riders in the first one that you saw, or that you recall the number?
I think that there was a list. When I was doing research on this, I think there was a list in the register of their complete list of who made the entire trip, and all the names were published in the register a couple of weeks after, which I've got the date of that, but I don't have it in the top of my head.
Oh, that's all right. Let me bring this up on screen because this is, this guy's a hero of mine. I just, and I've got some viewers that can recall this. I'm sure that's Donald Call, of course. I tell people journalism, why I got into it. I'm old enough to remember the assassination of John Kennedy. That had a huge impact on me. Watergate, of course, the Pentagon Papers. I went to Drake University. Bob Woodward and what they did with Watergate have since become very disillusioned with those guys because they don't support Julian Assange. Like, where the hell did they go missing at? But that had a huge effect on why I did what I did. But maybe the biggest impact on me was this guy, Donald Call. And Jim, I know you recall him well. Back in the papers, the major papers of the day, you had people like Donald Call, Mike Royko, Jimmy Breslin. You had these tough guy, left-wing, Democratic, liberal, newsprint ink under their fingernails type guy guys that had no backup in them, and I thought, man, that's admirable. That's what I want to. That's what I would like to be.
And one of the strong anti-war voices in the Vietnam.
Yes.
Paul became a strong. I wanted to segue a little bit to the Register, though. One of the things that made this important was the Register used to be a nationally recognized paper, and it was a statewide paper. It was appeared on the newsstands in Sioux City, Davenport, Clinton, and had a Washington bureau. Yep. I mean, this was a small, not a regional paper that had its own Washington bureau with Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, we at our farm, as I grew up, we got the Register every day, got delivered by mail. We didn't get it delivered by a letter or a newsboy. It was delivered by mail, but it came on that day. So this was, and the masthead called the Register the paper that Iowa depends on, and that day it was.
Yeah,
and these guys Karras and Call were great.
Oh, they were great. Call in particular, and I think he came out of Detroit, big pro-labor guy because of that. So he was pro-union, he was anti-war, he was big on human rights. He was, coming out of the 60s, almost a voice in the wilderness here, but he kind of changed things. I mean, he changed me. I got to say that for sure. I've got some more photos here. Let me see if I can bring. Okay, so here they are signing autographs. I mean, think of how the world has changed. Can you imagine somebody going up to a Des Moines Register reporter or columnist now in public and asking for an autograph? Yeah. There's a Call. This is a famous photo of him with his crazy socks there that he had. I mean, this guy was a free spirit. I wanted to be like that. And then here's this banner that one of the hometowns had for the riders approaching. Welcome, Donald Call and John Karras, the caravan. I mean, that's just absolutely great.
It was really wonderful riding along. We could ride right beside them and chat on this trip.
Yeah.
And every night we had an opportunity to talk with them, and it was very nice.
And as you mentioned, the Register had that kind of legacy as a statewide newspaper. I know that for sure. I was on WHO, which was a statewide radio station, of course, and at night it was more than that. But in the early mornings, it was my job to go get the state edition of the Register, which would come out at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because I had to go out to the state. And that was what I started the day with at WHO, was looking at that statewide edition of the Register that was printed and soon became outdated, later in the day. And they printed, another edition. But yeah, again, we're digressing a little bit, but that's kind of what we're talking about there. Where's that great bike ride across Iowa? Okay. So let me get to this before we run out of time here. But so I saw this and I kind of did a double take, a head snap. Isn't anybody saying this? Because everybody's saying, oh God, Iowa, nice. What a wonderful state we live in. The governor's out promoting a new logo. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And RAGBRAI, nobody ever says anything negative about. And I got to tell you something, folks. Now, I ride a bicycle. I ride literally hundreds, if not thousands of miles a year. But I'm not into this. I mean, I'm not into an event. I'm not into a rolling carnival. I have no interest in that. But that, that's just me personally. That's not so much a slight on RAGBRAI, but people would say, George, you ought to try it sometime. Well, I'm just not a RAGBRAI guy. But here's what Jim says. I rode on the first RAGBRAI from Sioux City to Davenport back in 1973. In the vernacular of that time, it was a blast. Shows you how old I am. I still say things are a blast. Over 300 of us made that trip, with hundreds joining in along the way. I compare that to what we have today. Everywhere, people greeted us with enthusiasm. In Kingsley, Iowa, the mayor asked residents to go all out in providing us with free pop. Now, again, you're showing your Iowa colors. We call it pop here. They call it soda in other parts of the country. Coffee and sandwiches. We were never hungry along the way, and mostly paid nothing. And I think these writers still get some free stuff along the way, Jim. But again, this paying carnival aspect of it is come into vogue now. That's kind of what it's changed, what it's become, I think. Let me go back here to the next graph. So everyone knows about the bet between Register columnist Donald Call and John Karras, who precipitated RAGBRAI. Okay, I'm not so sure everybody does know. Tell them about it. Tell them about what was the bet, Jim?
Well, I can't remember exactly. I think it was Karras who made the bet with Call, but I could be wrong on this. That they couldn't pull it off. That he couldn't ride across
Oh,
the whole state of Iowa. One of them bet the other,
okay.
and he said, "I'll take you on, but you have to ride with me," or something to that effect. I wish I knew the specific. Somebody at the register may know the specifics of the bet, but it was a bet one against the other, and I don't know who made it.
Yeah, great guys. My God,
Yeah.
legends lost. I got to say, now, do you want to comment at all at this point about, and it's kind of muddied in the waters, and it's been a long time ago, and I've kind of forgotten, but why did Call leave the register? Why did he join the Cedar Rapids Gazette? Then he, I think, syndicated, went out on his own. What was that all about? Do you recall? Do you know what the basis of
No,
that?
I don't know that.
Yeah, okay. That's
Yeah,
all right.
certainly the register lost their best writer.
Yeah, and well, and like you said, they used to have a Washington bureau. They they lost a lot of things. Okay, so let me get this back at big enough where I can read it here. Everyone knows about the bet between register columnist Donald Collin, John Karras, who precipitated RAGBRAI, but that story was quickly overtaken by Clarence Pickard, an 83-year-old retired Iowa farmer from Indianola who chose to join in just to prove the older people could do things too. Well, there he is.
There he is on his Schwinn.
On his Schwinn with a pit helmet. I mean,
Yep.
but there might have been a reason for that I was unaware of. I thought, well, he was an old farmer. Farmers would wear stuff like that once in a while. Not many farmers, and he was probably a little eccentric. But again, look at the era. Look at the people around him. Look at the older women there with the, I can't even think what those things are. It might have been drizzling a little bit that day, but they're protecting their hair and they've got those old style sunglasses on and stuff. My God, that was a long time ago, Jim. But you later found out, I think, that old Clarence maybe had a real use for that helmet in India or with the Peace Corps, something like that. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah. Nowadays everybody wears a bit sun hats.
Yeah.
You didn't see sun hats so much back in. You see the feed store caps and baseball caps, but nowadays sun hats are pretty common. But yeah, Clarence might have, as a Peace Corps volunteer in India, might have taken up the habit of a larger hat. I didn't discover that he and I had both at almost the same time been Peace Corps volunteers in India until I did some research for this column. I didn't know that. It never came up anywhere until I read it in one of the stories about the first RAGBRAI.
Well, just briefly, we've got time here. Tell us about the Peace Corps experience and how it's changed. The Peace Corps still exists, right? I mean,
oh yeah. I don't know how big it is at this point. I first got interested in the Peace Corps during the anti-Vietnam War era. Four of my friends, four of my high school classmates joined the Marines. One didn't. One died in Vietnam. And I felt, being anti-war, that I should, make some effort to do something positive. So when the Peace Corps started recruiting a project, they recruited something called Iowans for India. And they were looking for young people with agricultural experience, ag graduates, and retired farmers, where they had these target people that they were looking to recruit. And being 19 years old with a lot of farm experience, I thought, well, gee, my friends are off fighting this war, and I can go do something else. And so I applied and got accepted, and ended up training in Davis, California, to be sent to India. And amazingly enough, I was the only Iowan. I was recruited in this Iowans for India project, but I ended up among 90 young men who were training there. I was the only Iowan. And I don't know if Clarence, being a retired farmer, now that was, I first heard about the Iowans for India in the paper. I read it in the Register.
Yeah.
And but he might have been recruited in a similar way, and because he was a retired farmer with years of experience. and we both. He was there in 66 and 67, and I was there in 67 and 68. So.
Yeah, I
I,
love
and I
hearing
didn't know that. If I known that, I would have searched him out. I didn't really on the ride. I didn't. I might have chatted with him once or twice, but I didn't have any knowledge that he was a Peace Corps volunteer.
That's great. Just briefly, the overall experience of the Peace Corps, was it fulfilling? Was it worthwhile? Was it a happy
Well,
experience?
it was life changing. It was life changing for
Yeah.
me to go as a 19-year-old to go overseas, to live in another culture, a wonderful culture. India is a wonderful place, wonderful people, wonderful food. Everything was so. I came back a different person, having learned another language, having experienced another world. I just came back a completely changed person, and for the better.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, compare that to somebody that goes into the military service and comes back ruined, as an example, and cannot
Yeah.
even manage or contribute to society because of what we've done to them. And
Yeah.
people run around saying, "Thank you for your service." Well, okay.
Yeah.
For the Peace Corps, Jim, thanks for your service, pal. I mean, what you did over there, that's great. And I just love you talking about it and mentioning that Call was this big anti-war voice because Jim was right, folks. You know who else was right? Donald Call was right. Those people on the left that were heroes of mine were correct about the war and so many other things. Yet, where are those voices today?
Yeah.
You won't see them on network news. You won't see them on the nightly cable television shows. I don't care which one you're watching. You won't see it on Fox. You're not going to see it on MSNBC. Those people who were correct have been demonized. They've been marginalized. They're no longer heard or seen. And Jim, that's why I do this show, basically, is to give them, to contribute a little bit to this independent patchwork quilt, to provide some voice, some platform to those types of folks.
I was saddened to see the celebration around Henry Kissinger's 100th birthday, mostly because many of us regard him as a war criminal.
Yes.
3 million dead in Southeast Asia during his term as Secretary of State, and 58,000 young Americans dying, which is a smaller number against the 3 million, but it was unnecessary and terrible.
Yeah. Put him up there, like you say, it's like a hand reaching out of the grave. I think of him and people like Madeleine Albright and people that participated, promoted and supported the Iraq War, including the current president, folks.
Right.
And people, and my God, they just appointed Elliot Abrams to a post and for a diplomacy. My God, what in the hell are we thinking of? Well, anyway, I digress. Let me get this up on screen here so that we can continue to move through Jim's article today. I'm going to get this. I keep bringing this up so that I can't read it, but it says here. Okay, we're talking about Clarence again. He waited every night for Clarence to make it to our campsites. The longest ride was that 110-mile stretch from Des Moines to Williamsburg. He made it quite late after making a wrong turn that put him on Interstate 80, where a kindly state trooper got him back on the right road. It was only in doing some research, as Jim was talking about, to write this, that I learned that Clarence and I had something else in common. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in India from 1966 to 68. And as Jim mentioned, he was a Peace Corps volunteer in India in 67 through 69. It would have been nice to talk to him about that. Rest in peace, Clarence. Okay. So now we're getting to it, folks. Jim says, when I realized this year was the 50th RAGBRAI, I thought I should, maybe, being 76 now, and to honor Clarence, give it a shot. I'm still biking and feel I could handle that long of a ride. Then I thought about the differences between Iowa in 1973 and 2023. Now we're getting to it. This is what I talk about on my show all the time. Maybe it's because we're dying this death of 1,000 paper cuts and we just don't stop to think and realize what has happened in this great land that we stole by and large. I don't want to get into that issue, but I mean, we happen to be here, and how we have befouled and ruined what we have. Jim says on that first ride, we went through vibrant small towns, past hundreds of family farms, seeing livestock in the fields. At every creek or stream, we stopped to cool our feet, wade, or swim. Think about that, folks. My God, there are warnings all over the place not to go in the water. Don't put your dog in the water. It'll make your dog sick, for God's sake, let alone you just jumping into a creek or a stream in the state of Iowa. Most people would never do that. Most people wouldn't eat the fish from it. I mean, that's what we've done. And people don't stop to think and realize what's happening until you see an article, a column like Jim's. There were fence rows where wildlife abounded. Okay, Jim, talk in your life here. Talk about how things have changed.
Well, let's go right back to Redbird Farms.
Yeah.
Redbird Farms area borders on the Old Man's Creek, which for 25 years I took the Old Man's Creek name for my produce business, Old Man's Creek Organics. When I was a child, my granddaughter's age, now 6, I would go to the creek, and the creek was a meandering stream, and every quarter mile, half mile up that stream, you'd find a beaver dam in extent, and the beaver dams were permanent dams. The beavers were there all the time, and some of the dams were so substantial that you could use them as a walking bridge to walk across. They actually had dirt and grass growing on top of them. As a meandering stream behind all those beaver dams, you had, the pool that you could fish in and catch catfish and bullheads and other fish. And now with modern agriculture, the Old Man's Creek is no longer a meandering stream, and it's been straightened. The beaver dams are all gone. There are no beaver dams because the flash flooding, the quick rise and fall of the water would wash them all away. So the beaver dams are gone. The fish are, if they're there at all, are basically unedible because of the chemicals. And so what a change! What a change! I mean, yeah. It's hard to explain to people that, the changes that have taken place.
And none of them good. And if it ain't natural, it ain't natural, folks. Is what I tell people. It's never. And this is just one small example of it. Go ahead, Jim.
No, there was a story in the paper a few weeks back about the PFOS
yes.
fish that they're finding them everywhere. It's just that virtually all the fish in Iowa now contain these permanent chemicals, forever chemicals, and you're not supposed to eat them, of course, or drink them. And I immediately contacted the DNR fisheries, and I said, well, we're going to tell Iowa about this. I mean, they heavily promote fishing from the DNR, and I said, when are you going to tell the people of Iowa that they shouldn't be eating these fish? And they said, well, we're still studying this.
Yeah, it takes a lot of study done. I want to bring this comment up on screen. I had it up briefly earlier, but it really gets to it. Now, this is from the great Mary Knox. She says, my best memories are of wading in streams and attempting to catch wild creatures like crayfish and minnows, frogs, etc. Okay, the point that I want to make about that is the wonderful part about the Peace Corps, and Jim talked about this, his love for the Indian people, going over to India and doing what he did. It expands your horizon. You learn to love and appreciate your fellow humans, for God's sake, instead of military, killing people, being a hunter, being chased, being hunted yourself. Think of the difference there in your perspective and how you approach the world. Well, think of it in terms of wildlife. If you're doing what Mary Knox did, if you're doing what Jim did, if you're wading into streams and you're studying and enjoying crayfish, minnows, frogs, that type of thing, if you're living amongst the animals like the Native Americans did, as an example, think of how you learn to appreciate and love those people, just like Jim did the people the animals, just like he did the people in India. Huge difference. Well, now those habitat areas in Iowa are gone. The wildlife is gone. The only people that go out anymore into these forested areas are hunters. Again, like the military that I talked about. They're out there to kill. They come back home with bloody heads. Think about the difference in humanity, the perspective that we have because of that. That can't be said enough, Jim. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for some hunters and fishermen, the ones who are trying to preserve habitat and protect habitat, and Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever are doing a good job in trying to do that. They're up against some bigger forces that have a lot more power than they do, uh, namely, big ag, and but I'm surprised that more voices from that community, from the hunting community, haven't been raised about the loss of habitat. They seem to have kind of in the last decade kind of grown silent on this issue. And you watch the clearing of land in Johnson County, the just marginal little pockets of forest or wetland that have. One of our neighbors out on the Black Diamond, some years ago, created a wetland in an area that was hard to farm. And they put a big sign saying government assistance to create this, 20-acre or whatever wetland. They had ducks and wildlife, and it was quite nice. Actually, a beautiful little restoration project. I was disheartened to discover last year that they had drained it all again. We're going back to corn. Yeah. So somehow, we've lost allies in this fight. A lot of people have just gone. I talked about the Democratic Party going kind of silent on these issues. They don't like to use that term environment.
Yeah, that's a big change. It's business a go-go. I mean, everybody's bought into the trickle-down theory that what helps corporations and big America business, and that's what helps us all. But of course, tragically, we know that that's not true. Let me bring this up on screen. This is what Jim writes. He says, on the first ride, we went through vibrant small towns, past hundreds of family farms, seeing livestock in the fields. As we mentioned, the fence rows where the wildlife abounded. And then he writes that that Iowa is gone. He says, I recently went to Dubuque to visit the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium. Highway 151 used to go through pleasing small towns and past dozens of family farm dairy operations. Now the road bypasses those towns, and the dairy farms are gone, replaced by ethanol grain operations. And I'm glad you mentioned it in that context, because a lot of people think, well, what's wrong with growing corn? What's wrong with growing? Well, it's the use. I mean, we're feeding the world. No, you're not. You're feeding ethanol. You're feeding the greenhouse gases. You're feeding the production of fuel. We're not talking about Brussels sprouts here, folks. We're talking about corn and soybeans and how they're used today. Jim writes that the thought of riding across Iowa and seeing the abandoned farmsteads, smelling the stench of the CAFOs, which many environmentalists and climate scientists will tell you is the number one problem with the climate, are the greenhouse gases created by these stinking, horrible CAFOs and the slaughtering of millions of these animals and the inflation of America physically because of what we're eating, folks, looking in vain for the fence rows and the windbreaks, enduring miles of endless corn and soybeans, which the bees can't even use. I mean, being fearful of any contact with our surface waters would be too much for me. So count me out. Kind of a peace out type ending there. Jim, I don't know. Like I said at the top here, a lot of people would take exception to that. They at the least would call you a curmudgeon, maybe at the worst call you, anti-business. You're just being an old grouch. But man, I think you're on it. I think you're all over it. I think that's exactly right. And I can understand why you feel the way that you do. Have you gotten any pushback on this column or from people that don't agree with you?
Well, since I'm not on social media, it's difficult.
Ah,
It's difficult for the worst of the, the opposition to get in quick contact with me.
yeah.
So no, I have not. I mentioned that I was somewhat surprised that the Register printed it. I the Gazette took it right up. I was fearful that the Register might view it as anti-RAGBRAI, which I think if you look at it, I mean, it isn't anti-RAGBRAI. It's focused on other issues that I should be concerned about. And I don't know, I want to hold up a book here, which I'm sure you've read, which is Chris Jones's The Swine Republic, which is a collection of his blog posts on these whole issues of Iowa agriculture. And if you haven't read this book, for those of you who are watching, you should get a copy and read it. Go to the library, buy a copy, circulate it among your friends, because it really tells in his first opening essay, he tells virtually the whole story of how we got from in the last 60 or 75 years to the point where we are. And, you know, you can't blame, you can't single out anybody in particular to blame for this. You can't say, oh, this is the farmer's fault, or oh, this is so-and-so's fault, because a lot of these things happen incrementally. And but at every step along the way, we made the wrong decision. At every step, we've made the wrong turn, and now we're stuck where we are, and it's going to be really hard to undo all the damage that's been done. I think there remains some hope, but again, Chris Jones, Swine Republic, big story on the nitrates in our water, the dead zone. You know, why nothing is changing? Why politically, you know, the story in Des Moines, we know that. You know,
yeah, Chris. Now I haven't read that book. I got to admit, I haven't read it. Chris Jones. Is he I've heard of it. Is he that farmer? Does he farm also?
No, he's a hydrologist. That
okay.
He originally worked for the Soybean Association, and he has a real interesting professional career track. He was a hydrologist at the University of Iowa, and he was basically responsible for about 20 years of studying the Iowa water system in its entirety. You know, across water sampling across the state, and he just has firsthand knowledge of the reality of the water situation, and also he has firsthand experience of who is preventing anything from being done about it. And must read book. Must read book.
I like the context that you put it in. It's a reality. It kind of smacks you upside the head. People, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. Hell, I don't like it. I don't like what's going on. But we can't just go around patronizing what we like, for God's sake, or the reality doesn't get out of there. And I was talking about what recently here, Sylvia Secchi at the University of Iowa. She's appeared on my show before, and the point that she makes, a lot of great comments, but if you don't understand anything else, think about what she says and what Jim is trying to tell us here. The Iowa farmers that we think of and still think of today, I mean, that's hard to believe, but people still think about the small Iowa farmer out there on his farmstead, you know, with a sprig of weed in his teeth and, you know, talking to Pat. That doesn't exist anymore. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about farmers trying to make a living on a couple 100 acres of land. These are big businesses. Most of the farm land now is owned by big corporate businesses. Think of a Wall Street executive. That's a little bit closer. Many of these farmers, most of them, I think, probably don't even live on the land. They're farming fence row to fence row, corn and soybeans. They're vacationing in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, there are some, don't get me wrong, but it's not the small farmer that we're thinking of. It's like, you can't criticize small farmers because we love them. Well, the guys that you love have been pushed off the farms. Their families no longer are able to do it. And that's not what I'm talking about anyway, Jim.
No, the changes have been large and systematic. I still have a lot of sympathy for anybody who's farming, because it's incredibly difficult work and you're
dangerous.
Dangerous. You're at the mercy of so many things, whether it's weather or bankers or equipment manufacturers or pest, suppliers. You're out there trying to earn an honest living, and I think what Chris Jones does in his book is he points out that every other part of this system is working against farmers and claims to be working with and for them, and in fact they're working directly against the interests of the few family farms that do remain, and there are some.
Yeah.
But overall, we've gone from, I think, in RAGBRAI 1, we had 85,000 pork producers in Iowa. RAGBRAI 50, we're down below 15.
Wow.
So that's your drop and you can see, and they are bigger and bigger and bigger and producing so much waste. I mean, the waste, the amount of fecal material that the Iowa pork industry, not to mention just the chickens and turkeys and beef cattle and so forth produces, but the amount of fecal waste that our pork industry produces is just astronomical, and it has to go somewhere. It either has to be put on the land, which is not capable of taking that much, or it has to go down the waterway. That's
where it goes. I mean, I tell people, they talk about nitrates, which scientifically is what it is. We're talking about pig manure here, folks. You're bathing in it. You're in the streams. You're in the rivers. You're drinking it to a certain extent. When they talk about nitrate levels in water, that's what they're talking about. Before we live, I do remember Chris Jones and the controversy. This is what Mary Knox is pointing out. She's in your part of the state also. She says, Chris Jones worked at the University of Iowa. He recently resigned under intense political pressure. He wrote a blog about Iowa's water problems almost weekly. So yeah, there was a little bit of controversy regarding Chris Jones. Again, people didn't like that did not support big business. And there's a comment. There's Brenda. Hi, Brenda. She's commenting. So I always like to get these comments on screen. They want to share these with the guest. There's Mary Knox again. With a Substack article talking about the truth about Iowa's polluted waterways and that type of thing. Jim, maybe you saw this news report. The DNR reported last week they found 20,000 dead flat-nosed sturgeons in a stretch of the lower Des Moines River. I mean, it's just like, God, do you see this? Do you not realize what's happening? I get exasperated. I get frustrated. And sometimes I think I'm a voice in the wilderness until I come across a guy like you that's written an outstanding column like the one we're talking about today, Jim.
Well, I don't think you're alone. I think there are many people out there that share this sentiment. I don't understand why they aren't more vocal.
I wanted to also talk to you about something that you mentioned very briefly, because I've got this video that I want to play, but it's these carbon capture pipelines. I mean, this is another part of the landscape, and you mentioned the eminent domain issue in that. And I started off by talking about Jim's time as an environmentalist. He's planted thousands of trees. And of course, these people that are opposed to the carbon capture pipelines, you've kind of got two tiers. You've got the farmers and the people that own the land. They don't want people on their land imposing their will upon them when it comes to the pipelines. And I get that. Then you've got the people, that are environmentalists that don't want the pipelines there damaging the land with the potential to leak. And then you've got the people, and I'm in this group also, that say, hell, it won't work. I mean, it's money. It's the science is not sound. It doesn't work. So I'm going to play Chip and Dale here. We'll come right back after this. But to me, it's a Walter Mitty thing. It's a Rube Goldberg science, basically, these carbon capture pipelines. I've had the great Emma Schmidt, who's a big activist against these things on my show. And we've talked about it here. But here's Chip and Dale. Watch this. So that's what we're talking about there. A lack of science, a lack of efficiency. I mean, big modernization, big money involved in this. It's all at the top. That's what you're going to see here in the state of Iowa. And speaking of the state of Iowa, now we're going to lose Jim here pretty soon, but I did want to get his feelings on this because this is a big issue. Iowa freedom to flourish. Governor Kim Reynolds announced Tuesday that Iowa would roll out a new state logo tagline to appear on state websites and interstate highway welcome signs. That's a special, that again, this is out of the Des Moines Register. And I look at that and I thought, well, okay, it ain't going to do any good. Okay, well, just keep reading here. Fields of Opportunities is out. Freedom to Flourish is in. Governor Kim Reynolds announced Tuesday she's rolling out a new state logo and that slogan, and it'll appear on agency websites. Reynolds said the new logo would start appearing on the websites Tuesday. It'll continue to be phased in over the coming weeks and months. Quote, this is from the Kingfish herself, Kim Reynolds. I want to promote Iowa as an employment destination so we can attract top talent nationwide and build Iowa's workforce across all industries, Reynolds said. Quote, I want to recruit or bring home our native Iowans. Let's see, yeah, they're fleeing, and it's because of you. But anyway, I digress. Who grew up here, but left thinking opportunities would be better elsewhere. And I can't wait to just remind them and show them all that what Iowa has to offer now. And I like this quote from Jennifer Conforst. She's been on my show before. She's a Democrat out of Windsor Heights, Iowa. If the governor truly wanted to give Iowans the freedom to flourish, she would not be banning healthcare decisions for women, banning books, or banning curriculum, said House Minority Leader Jennifer Conforst. Okay, and my main bitch with the slogan of the logo, of course, is that we're all going to pay for it and the manner in which we're paying for it. She's using that American Rescue Fund money, that CARES Act money, kind of the second phase of that. The governor was squatting on $2 billion for, my God, I think well over a year, maybe going on 2 years, this pot of gold. And this is how she's choosing to spend some of it anyway, on a damn slogan, a silly logo, and at the meantime, cutting back on all of these services provided to the people of Iowa. I don't know. I kind of rambled there, Jim, but what's your take on our new slogan, our Fields to Flourish, or whatever that thing is?
Yeah. Well, I haven't come up with the parody yet, but I was just thinking freedom for clean fish or something like that.
Yeah.
No, bringing people to come to Iowa. If you want people to come to this state, you really need to clean up the water. You can't. Kim Reynolds couldn't bring someone here and take them down any Iowa stream and say, "This is why we want you to come here, for this beautiful river that's full of fish that your children could swim in," because none of that's true. And so it's just another empty slogan. It's just another scheme. And this is a governor who's full of schemes. She doesn't have, another one of my complaints is, I mean, Iowa's a senior state. It's a state of old people now. Younger people are leaving. And even the older people aren't being taken care of. And the nursing home situation in Iowa is terrible. People are dying in our nursing homes because they can't get people to work in them, or because they're not being inspected.
Yes.
And this is a governor whose only mechanism is to put herself in front of the camera and do crazy things like come up with new slogans. And I don't understand why she's in the position she's in. It's difficult to think that an educated state like this could put a person like this in charge.
Yeah, it's all who she's linked to. It's the big business support and the fact that many Iowans, the majority, according to the last election, that go to the polls and vote anyway, believe in this connection to big business and how it's going to benefit us all, which it does not. I liken her to the past Huey Long down there in Louisiana. That's why I call her the Kingfish. I mean, she is wanting to autocratically run the state of Iowa, and she's running it into the ground, folks, because as Jim says, how the hell do you promote a state where you ride a bicycle past a CAFO? I mean, my God,
you work to destroy your public schools.
Yes.
How do you attract people to come?
Yeah. Here's a comment from, we're going to lose Jim here. I'm going to have him wrap up here very shortly, just kind of give us a closing comment. But Murray Knox says freedom is a catch phrase for GOP to attract more publicity. It's rather odd as they take freedoms away from anyone who disagrees with them. That's exactly right. Here's the great Susan June Robbins, a favorite of mine, folks. Freedom from regulations like child labor or environmental protections. Well, that's great. I want to thank let's see here. We got there's another one about the small farms that are missing. So I want to take that off screen and kind of I'm going to give Jim the last word here because that was a great column that he wrote. It spawned an entire podcast by George episodes. So Jim, take it away here. Give us some closing thoughts. I love what you said about the elderly state, the people here that need to be taken care of. And I've pointed out on my show recently, it's really odd considering that we've got a U.S. senator, one of the top 100 most powerful people in the world. And that U.S. senator is 115 years old. And we've got a president that I think is 114 years old, thereabouts, somewhere in those ballparks. And we're not taking care of our elderly. And why? It's because they've drank the Kool-Aid. They're pro-business. Go find a reason. It is shocking. It is disgraceful that we are a society that doesn't take care of our land, our water, and our elderly. I don't think it's ever been seen before, and that's who we are. And Jim, wrap it up here. Give us a close.
Well, and you think, you think about the Iowa Republican Party as a party who railed for years against big government, and regulation, and now they're ready to ride roughshod with big government over the private property of Iowa farmers and landowners. They're, that the pipelines are going to go through.
Yes.
They're going to use eminent domain. It's almost a done deal, and nobody can say it. Nobody can stand up to it. Even anyway, I don't. That's not where I want to end. I mean, I want to thank you, George, for having me on and calling attention to the things that you do. Thank you very much for that.
Well, and thank you for saying what you said just then as an example. Nobody will say it, but Jim will. So look for his writings, folks. It's Jim Walters. And thanks again. We'll circle back. He's a new friend. I'm going to have this guy on again because he's on it, folks. I mean, spot on. Jim Walters, thanks again for coming on this podcast by George Live Line.
Thank you.
Yeah, and folks, I want to say this in closing now, like I always do. If you like hearing these voices, which, as I have said so many times, you're not going to get to see and hear very often in very many places. Jim was surprised that this column even got in the papers, as an example, because it was critical of RAGBRAI. I mean, but if you like seeing him on shows like mine, you got to subscribe. You got to follow me. And to do that, it's very easily done. Go to podcastbygeorge.com. Don't search it on Google or Facebook or whatever. You'll spend an hour and you'll find the Prince of England who's named George, and you'll find all kinds of podcasts and things like that. It just go to podcastbygeorge.com. Facebook and YouTube, the platforms, the icons, the badges are there. Click on those things. It'll take you to those pages on Facebook and YouTube, and then you can subscribe very easily. And you can ring the notification bell if you're on YouTube, and do leave us a comment. That always helps. That's for the video live streams like today. Now, if you just like to hear the audio, you don't want to sit, nailed to your phone or your PC, your laptop or whatever to watch a video. I get that. Just listen to the audio podcast. They are repurposed within an hour or two after the live streams end, and they appear on, well, most notably iTunes, most popular Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Deezer, Stitcher, and those places. All of those platforms are found with simple click of the mouse on podcastbygeorge.com. But folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.